We're going to be talking about the American Revolution now. So this should be something that you're a little more familiar with. There's going to be two parts. This is the thesis. You can kill their soldiers, but the people you didn't convince. There's going to be a number of questions throughout the PowerPoint. Some are based on primary sources and some are just kind of thinking questions. So first we're going to talk about what happened before the American Revolution. We're going to look at the term mercantilism. This is really important understanding why what happened. But mercantilism was an economic theory during this time that encouraged nations to have colonies. And the colonies were supposed to be a source of raw materials, and nations were encouraged to be self-sufficient. They felt it was better to export than to import. So take a look at these different countries down below: British, Dutch, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and this shows where their colonies were. This also will show on our East Coast what kind of raw materials that we provided. So we did provide quite a bit. Now take a look at this. We're going to get our manufactured goods from England, and then we're sending off different raw materials. We're obviously getting raw materials and slaves, people from Africa, and then sending some things to them. So I need you to write down the Navigation Acts of 1760. And this is obviously before the American Revolution. But what that says is that we are not allowed to, England put this on us, we are not allowed to get anything from other countries. We must go through England. So if we want something from France or Spain, we have to go through England. So England wants us completely dependent on them for manufactured goods. Okay, some people spend a lot of time on the French Indian Wars. I'm only going to say one sentence. It's a little bit longer, but if you can write this down, this definitely leads to the American Revolution. But in the French Indian Wars, what happens is the English get rid of the French on our continent and they make us pay. The English get rid of the French on our continent and they make us pay. So for example, before, if you looked, you would see the French had a lot of, like Louisiana in the middle, Louisiana Purchase, but now they don't. So the British are here, the Spanish are here. You can see the Russian up above, but the French are not in our continent anymore. Actually, there's a tiny, tiny little bit in Canada. Anyways, okay, so a couple of things again that are also important to know beforehand is we are no longer acting like Puritans. We love nice stuff. So if you remember that guy, the B.Y. Bird guy, the guy that was the jerk to his slave and also to his wife, these are some things that his family owned. Here the women are getting very, very dressed up, and there are lots of laws called sumptuary laws, where if you had a certain amount of wealth, you could wear a certain amount of ruffles and buttons. This was really true from the Puritans. But now people don't care so much about those laws. They want to wear as many ruffles and buttons, and they love fancy materials, and they're getting all that from England. So it wasn't just the women that like to dress up. Here's a man who is wearing calf pads. So remember, they're wearing those stockings or breeches, and so he's wearing kind of larger calf pads in the summer, and then in the winter he would wear smaller calf pads. So again, people are pretty vain. Another couple things that you need to know is that a big theme that we're going to be discussing is a huge reason for the American Revolution is that the English very much disrespected us, and all we wanted to do was have them respect us. So two examples. One is George Washington. I'm sure you've heard of. Before he was president, he was just a pretty wealthy guy, and he wrote to England and asked for a new suit. And what he received back was an old-fashioned, kind of out of fashion second-hand suit. So the guy that he sent the note to went to the local thrift store or whatever and sent him something. So he did not get very much respect, right? Another one that you might recognize is Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was never president, but he was one of our most notable Americans. And when he went to England, which he loved, and we're going to talk about that, how his changing opinion of England is going to change everything for us. But before the American Revolution, he loved England. And he said, though, when he went there, that people treated him like the grandson of an indentured servant, which he was, or I think the 10th son of a candle maker. So people did not respect us very much, and that really bothered us. Okay, so in order to get money for the French Indian War, they enacted the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act is going to require us to have stamps on everything, on legal papers, on gambling cards, on everything. Now, did the British, I want you to answer this question, whatever your opinion is, did the British have the right to tax the colonists without representation? Remember, we're not there, we're not in Parliament making these decisions. And what were the fears of the colonists? What I want you to think about is, who would be taxed without representation over in England? Who would not, have representation in Parliament? And who would not be treated well in England? And why are, we're afraid of being treated like that. Okay, then the next one is, I need you to look up the primary source. Thomas Hutchinson recounts the mob reaction to the Stamp Act. So we do start to riot. We'll be talking about rioting later also, because it is definitely a part of our history. So look at it and say, what phrases did Mr. Hutchinson use to let the reader know whom he believed to be at fault? Thomas Hutchinson was the governor of Massachusetts, and we're going to talk about him. He's definitely going to play a part in all these problems. But he really sides with the English, so just know that. But look at it and say, does he like the mob, or does he agree with the Stamp Act? And I kind of just gave you a big hint right there, but I need you to see what kind of phrases he uses. Okay, so if I could just use one picture for the American Revolution, this would be it. And the reason being is, if you look to the guy, the second from the left, look at how he's dressed. So is he a rich guy? No, he's a working man. Then look to the young man next to him, the African American, and he's also protesting. And then to the right of him is a woman. So this is very much the American Revolution. That's going to be a big theme for us, is working class, African Americans, women, all fighting for their rights. Again, that's very different from normal wars. Normal wars would be, the rich people, right? Fighting and getting lower class people to fight for them. I mean, that happens here too, but it is the lower class, the working class, the women, the African Americans that are definitely taking a stand. Okay, so this is when people bought stamps, there was a group that did not like that at all. The Americans really didn't like that very much. It's called the Voice of the People, Vox Populi, and it says, the first man that either distributes or makes use of stamps, paper, let him take care of his house, person, or effects. So it's saying in effect. So just, if you buy stamps, if you go along with what the English want, we are going to come get you. And here is kind of like a scarecrow. They call it an effigy, where they're making like an effigy of a stamp master. So they definitely don't like the stamp master. This is a book that shows what kind of stamps have been bought. As you could tell, it's not very full. So England does say to us, okay, we hear you. We're going to stop this Stamp Act. But then what happens is, it's just like if you have a curfew, right, when you're in high school or whatever, and you come home an hour afterwards or 2 hours afterwards, and your parents send you to bed, and, is that the end of it? Are you going to hear more? Absolutely. Next morning, you're probably going to get slammed. And that's exactly what happened with us, is England said, okay, we'll stop the Stamp Act. But then what they did is they hit us hard with the Declaratory Act. And what the Declaratory Act says is that Parliament, that's the ruling body, can tax and legislate, or basically make laws for Britain's American possessions in all cases whatsoever. So let me say it again. The Declaratory Act says that Parliament can tax and legislate or make laws for Britain's American possessions in all cases whatsoever. And then what they do is they hit us with the Townshend Acts, and they tax us on glass, lead, paints, paper, and tea. Okay, so this is a question, just a thoughtful one. What's involved in a boycott? So what's the definition of a boycott? Who has to be involved in the colonies in order for a boycott to be successful? Is it just the rich guys? Who else buys stuff? Okay, next we have the Boston Massacre. And I believe you have a primary source on that. But anyways, what happens is and I'm going to ask you a question about it in just a couple minutes. But there's a young boy who is giving a haircut to a British soldier. British soldier does not pay him. So the young boy goes to ask for his payment. Some people gather, some snowballs are thrown at the British soldiers, and then the British soldiers shoot into the crowd, and I believe it's 5 are killed. So the question is that a massacre? 5. We're kind of using that term, right? I don't know. yeah, a little extreme term, but take a look. This is the picture that was drawn by Patrick Henry, if you recognize him. Give me liberty, give me death. I believe, no, it's Paul Revere, excuse me. Paul Revere, I remember him, the British are coming. So this is what he drew. Is that what I described? Probably not. So this is definitely propaganda, right? If you're hearing about this incident, you see, or you can't read, whatever, you see this picture, you're going to think the British are, firing a lot of shots into a crowd. This picture is very important to me and to you, hopefully. This is Crispus Attucks, Crispus, Attucks, Attucks. So our very first martyr in our American Revolution, and even though we haven't started the revolution yet, but the precursors, is Crispus Attucks, and he was African American. So take a look. This is George Hughes' recollection of the Boston Massacre. And this will ask you about the boy in the crowd. So make sure that you read that. And how did the spirit of the revolution motivate the boy in the crowd? What do you think that means? Make sure you use some quotes in there. Okay, next we have the Boston Tea Party, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And as we know, what happened is the Bostonians got on board. They dressed as Native Americans, and they threw all of this tea overboard. The tea was not actually that priced that high, but we were definitely making a statement. Again, here they are dressed as Native Americans. So one quick story about that is there was a guy that was part of the rebellion, whatever, and he took the tea and stuffed it in his own pocket. And so what the other patriots did is they stripped him naked and sent him home. So why did they do that? Well, because he was getting away from the original intent of the boycott. I know we have a lot of controversy on that now, but I just need you to know that story. Okay, so this was a tea tax, whatever person. So what did they do? They tarred and feathered them, and they have Satan doing something with them. It's that kind of picture is pretty popular with these guys. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you a very important story, and it's Parliament versus Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin wrote this story. We have an old mother who's so peevish is grown. She stumps us like children that scarce walk alone. She forgets that we're grown with sense of our own. If we don't obey orders, whatever the case, she frowns and she chides and loses patience, and sometimes she hits us a slap in our faces. Her orders so that we often suspect that age has impaired her of sound intellect, but still an old mother should have due respect. So what is the relationship that he's describing here between America and England? It's that we're being treated like children, right? We still love her. She's still our mom, but we're 19 now. Quit treating us like we're 7. But it's not rebellion yet. It's not total rebellion. So what happens, and this is a little bit complicated story, but make sure you take a couple notes, is this is Thomas Hutchinson. And once again, does Thomas Hutchinson look like a macho guy? No, he's kind of a wimpy guy. And he, again, has a really hard time standing up against the English. So what he does is he sends a letter to England asking for troops. Now, Benjamin Franklin invented the post office, and he was over at the post office in England, and he saw the letter by Thomas Hutchinson. He opens it, which he probably shouldn't have done, and then he sends it to the patriots in America, and he says, whatever you do, don't publish this, which, of course, he wanted them to publish it, because he figures if Thomas Hutchinson gets in trouble, then everybody will get along again between England and America, because he really, really likes England. But the problem is, let's keep on going. Actually, I'll stay right there. The problem is that Parliament calls Benjamin Franklin, and Benjamin Franklin gets all dressed up in his, fancy clothes. And Parliament says, how dare you open the mail of another person? You are no gentleman. So what I like to compare that to is, imagine you're 13 and you have a huge crush on somebody, and they embarrass you in front of the whole school. Well, you hate them after that, right? And that's exactly what happened with Benjamin Franklin. He went from loving England and wanting it, being its biggest supporter, to hating them. And it's like they say, a lover spurned, right? So what Benjamin Franklin says is, I will make your king a little man for this. I'm going to get him back, basically. And I suppose I am too much of an American. So he stops identifying with England and starts identifying with America. So England made a really big mistake with making fun of him like that. So this, again, is just, all the stuff going on with the double and back and forth, and I think that's supposed to be Thomas Hutchinson. Okay, so what happens also as a result is England does what's called the Coercive or Intolerable Acts, where they say, yeah, we're going to send over some soldiers, and you need to house them and feed them. So they are now, taking over your bed, and you're in the couch, and they're eating all the food. And what we say is, hey, feel like slaves. Now, real slaves are around during this time, and they're saying, you're nothing like a slave. But we really like to use that. White people like to use that kind of imagery that we are, being treated like slaves. This is another picture of how we feel we're being treated. Here we are, America, the tea's being forced down our throat. This guy's looking up our skirt, and again, not being treated well. Okay, so then what happens is we get together with the First Continental Congress, and please know, you guys, that even though we're 13 colonies, we are in no way one country at all. I want you to imagine 13 countries in Africa or 13 countries in South America. We all get together. Most people have never been to each other's colonies. In fact, if you were in my class, I would pass around or show you these dollars, and they are different for every single colony. Every colony had their own kind of currency. Now, of course, they're not real that I have, because I'd be a zillionaire if they were. But I just need you to know we were not united, and the First Continental Congress, the purpose was to say, are we going to support Boston with their Tea Party? And we decided, yes, we are. Okay, so we're almost done with the first video. Now we have Patrick Henry, Give Me Liberty, Give Me Death. So look at that document. How would you respond if you heard this speech? Okay, so that's the end of American Revolution Part 1. Good job, everybody. You can kill their soldiers, but the people you didn't convince. We're going to go through that more later.